Bhagavad Gita. The title that's been given to the topic is Ma Shuchaha. This comes from the last chapter. Final instruction of Krishna. Do not fear, do not worry. Just take Krishna's instruction. So what we heard yesterday was chapter 7. And to introduce chapter 7, the last verse of chapter 6 is where Krishna declares to Arjuna, by all means, Arjuna, become a yogi, because there's many different things he's taught, but be a yogi. And of all systems of yoga, the best is devotional service. Devotional service has two parts, and the part that's being discussed in the middle 6 chapters or emphasized, including in this chapter 8, is Madgatain Antaratmana. Antaratmana is Krishna. Antar Atmana, the soul within, the supreme soul, super soul. Madgatain Antaratmana, with the mind absorbed in me. And engaged in service with faith. That's the topmost system of yoga. Chapter 7 begins with Krishna's making a declaration. Now I'm going to explain to you how to do that. And so he's fulfilling his promise, specifically how to Madgatain Antaratmana, how to always think of Krishna. So he began by explaining the energies of Krishna, material and spiritual, are both from him, and they're depending upon him, and everything that exists is a combination of those two, under his direction. He described that the essence of all things, he is that as well. So he's material nature, spiritual nature, the mixture of the two, the essence of all things within this cosmic manifestation. There's many ways by which one can Madgatain Antaratmana. And by the process of taking shelter, we heard about surrendering to Krishna, to cross over the ocean of duality, because this world is a place of duality. One can cross beyond it by surrender. There are those that do, there's that don't. There are different conceptions of those that don't. And those conceptions are obstacles to surrender to Krishna, but the conclusion was, by that taking shelter of Krishna, then transcendental life can be achieved. Now, at the end of chapter 7, there are some terms that are in the last 2 verses of chapter 7. There are some terms or nomenclature that Krishna used that make up the beginning part of chapter 8. Arjuna wants to know, what does this mean? What does that mean? Could you please explain? So that terminology, it's in one sense it's technical. Another sense it's just speaking principles. So there's several terms. The first one is Brahman. So what's Brahman? So there are different ways that the word Brahman is used. And in this particular case, Brahman is indicating the jiva, or the particle, the part of the para Brahman, the individual Brahman, the individual soul. And then Adhyatma. Adhyatma. Adhyatma is the nature of that living entity. And the nature of the living entity is to serve. Now, we have different ways of hearing or describing what the nature is. The swarup of the jiva is to serve, or our constitutional nature, or swadharma, is to serve. We're servants. We're parts of the Supreme, meant to serving the Supreme. So Adhyatma is the nature of the soul. That's the nature of service. And karma, that's an easy one. we're all very familiar with karma. The way it's defined here in chapter 8 is activity that develops bodies. It's karma. So karma is the activity, and the consequence of that activity is also karma. It's a reaction of karma. The material bodies are the outcome of our activities that generate the bodies. And so that means as we're going on with life, then more activities and more bodies and so on. Karma, so there's three: Brahman, Adhyatma, and karma. Adibhuta is the ever-changing material manifestation. So something that I'm very familiar with or accustomed to hearing is the different miseries of living entities. The adibautic, those that are in relation to material nature. Adidaivic is in relation to the demigods, so like disturbances that come, too much heat, too much rain, too much cold, too dry, something. Here, the definition is a little broader. It's the demigods and the controllers or the manifestors of those demigods. And that's the universal form. Adidaiva. In Naperville, the chapter that's being discussed is Canto 2, Chapter 10. Yes? And that's the manifesting of the universal form. And as the universal form manifests, it's not only the form of the universe, but it's the demigod that's controlling that feature of the universal form. Now, the universal form is a form of Krishna, and Krishna isn't controlled by the demigods, but the material nature has a presiding deity that oversees that aspect of material nature. So Adidaivam, it means, in this chapter, both the demigods and the Supreme Lord in the form of his universal form that oversees those affairs. Adidaivam, and then the final is Adiyagya. So the definition of Adiyagya is Paramatma. He is the recipient of sacrifices. The receiver of the sacrifices under the Supreme is Adiyagya. So remember what the promise that Krishna has made to Arjuna. He's going to explain to Arjuna how to Madgaten Antaratmana. So the Antaratma, that's the Adiyagya. How to keep the mind, how to get to the point where the mind becomes always absorbed in the Supreme. So following those introductory verses, I'll summarize, but also there's 4 verses in a row. That's the next set of verses that are well-known verses. Most of you know these verses. After explaining these Adibhutam, Adidaivam, and Adiyagyam, Krishna then explains, having the mind fixed on these features of the Supreme at the time of death, Antakale Chamamevam, Smaram Muktva Kalevaram. You will go to Krishna. Antakale Chamam Eva. Smaran Muktva Kalevaram. Ya Prayati Sa Madbhavam. Sa Madbhavam. That person attains my nature. So this is remembering Mangaten Antaratmana at the time of death. If you practice following the teaching of Bhagavad Gita and how to, then at the time of death, then you'll go to Krishna. The cycle of birth and death is broken. Then the next verse, another well-known verse, Yam Yam Vapi Smaran Bhavam Chajatante Kalevaram. Chajatante, at the time of giving up the body, yam yam vapi smaran bhavam, whatever you're thinking of at the time of death, that state you will attain without fail. This is chapter 8. So this is madgatena antaratmana, and practicing in the proper manner breaks the cycle of birth and death. Same point, because this chapter 8 is attaining the supreme. Verse number 7. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudhyacha. So he's giving an instruction. Mam anusmara, always think of me, and yudhyacha, engage in your prescribed duty. In case of Arjuna's yudhya, it's fighting. So he's giving him the instruction. The practical application of the teaching that's just been presented is mind absorbed in Krishna, mam anusmara, yudhyacha, engage in your prescribed duty. He doesn't say engage in fighting, but it's engage in your prescribed duty, which is fighting. Mam anusmara yudhyacha. Mayarpitoma no buddhir, mam evaishyasi asamshayaha. With your activities dedicated to me, and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, this is mam anusmara yudhyacha, explaining through chapter 8. And then the final verse of this little section is verse number 8. And the pages are stuck together. There we go. Abhyasa yoga yuktena. Those who are familiar with Bhagavad Gita, you know these verses. Abhyasa yoga yuktena. Chetasananya gamina. Paramam purusham divyam yati pramartyunachutam. He who meditates on me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from this path, is sure to reach me. So attaining the Supreme. In the mature stage, as practice in the ways mentioned, and other very simple ways like chanting and hearing, because tat shrinu and vakshami, by sound vibration, one can fix one's mind in Krishna. It's pretty simple. I mean, the principle is easy to understand, and that way simple. We hear something, and that something you hear helps bring your attention to that something that you've heard about. And you practice hearing transcendental sound, and that's what's in the mind. Or there's lots of conditioned tendencies from hearing so many other sounds, but if one practices in this lifetime, using this human form of life properly, according to the indications of Bhagavad Gita, hearing about Krishna and so forth, then it becomes possible and even natural to have the mind absorbed in that which you've heard, and at antakali chamamevam. Oh, yam yam vapi smaran bhavam. Same idea, basically. You attain that supreme. The cycle of birth and death is broken. So that's just the beginning part of chapter 8. And now Krishna is going to expand. He expands by giving some teachings about meditating on Krishna and his qualities. The term is introduced, yoga mishra bhakti. So we're not so much involved in that kind of yoga that yogis who are trying to fix their mind on supersoul do. Because previous, in chapter 6, is dhyan yoga, so that process is a process performed by yogis, not bhakti yogis, but there's a mixture of yoga mishra bhakti, where those that have a tendency, a meditation tendency, can fix their mind upon the Supreme, and in the course of their lifetime eventually attain the Supreme. but there's rules and there's procedures, and it's not recommended so much for us. It's not what we're taught to do. Just a little sharing. There was a sannyasi, a Gaudiya Math sannyasi, that had a nice relationship with Prabhupada. When he was a brahmachari, Prabhupada sent an invitation letter for him to come and join him to preach in America. And his guru wouldn't let him come, so he couldn't come. But later, when he accepted sannyas and his guru was departed, he came and he spent some time at our ISKCON center. And I remember he would chant his Gayatri mantra in the morning. It took about 20 minutes. And eventually somebody asked him, why so long? And he explained, before he was a devotee, he was practicing meditation. So he really took this chanting of Gayatri mantra very seriously. No, we shouldn't, but we don't need to take 20 minutes to that, and that's the sign that you're practicing seriously. But I had a very nice conversation with a younger American devotee, not younger than me at least, that recently received, maybe a month and a half ago, received Gayatri mantra, and they were sharing. It's really nice. Said, explain. So it's just in a regulated manner, in a clean condition, sitting down with nothing else going on, just meditating on Gayatri mantra and the meaning of the Gayatri mantra, and it's so absorbing, it's really ecstatic. I said, I'm going to share this with others. It's nice. It's a discipline, but it's more than a discipline. There's some vidhi, but there's more than vidhis. It's a very special sound vibration. The Gayatri mantras, plural, that are given within ISKCON. And for that matter, the Mahamantra. So that there's also meditation, mantra meditation. But the inspiration in mantra meditation for Vaishnavas is to be engaged in Krishna's service. So the internal absorption with the mood of wishing to be in service to Krishna, then comes the service. And don't separate the two. Mamanusmara yudhyacha. With mind absorbed in me, for engaging in your prescribed duties. And that's the recommendation of this chapter. So this yoga mishra bhakti is moving back a bit, where the practitioner of the yoga mishra bhakti, they're not so much, everyone has to do some practical activities just to maintain the body, but the focus for such persons, so unto Krishna is there, that's the bhakti part, but the strongest component is the meditation component. Meditation and Paramatma within, Antaratmana, the soul within, or the super soul, or Adhyatma, the super soul. And what Krishna indicates is that person can also, upon leaving their body, attain the spiritual realm, or spiritual planets. So that's a back to Godhead method. But the emphasis is less upon service and more upon the meditation part. There's service, but the emphasis is more on the meditation part, and therefore it's mixed. Yoga Mishra Bhakti. And then Krishna goes on, I'm going to read those verses, 14 through 16. He moves back again to pure devotional service. There's a mixed devotional service, by which one can also attain him eventually, but then there's pure devotional service, undivided devotional service. One who always remembers me without deviation, ananya cheta satatam, yo mam smarati nityashaha, Tasyaham sulabha partha nitya yuktasya yogina. For one who always remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain because of his constant engagement in devotional service. Nitya yuktasya. Constant engagement in devotional service. And then, Mam upetyu punar janma dukkhalayam ashashvatam. Sound familiar? Those of you that like Bhagavad Gita? Napnavanti mahatmana samsiddhim paramam gata. After attaining me, the great souls, poor yogis in devotion, never return to this temporary world that's full of miseries because they've attained the highest perfection. And then he goes on to saying, from the highest Brahmaloka down to the lowest, all that have birth and death, don't go for birth and death. Don't go for higher planets. Or just be fearful of the lower planets. Don't go for attraction or aversion. Go for transcendence. Abrahma bhuvana loka purnar avartanarjuna mam upetya. Those who come to me, mam upetya, one who attains my abode, purnar janma na vidyate. So those are important verses. Yeah. Pure devotional service. Attaining the Supreme through the medium of pure devotional service. Then he goes back again and describes the cycle of birth and death. Sahasra yuga paryantam arharyad brahmano vidu. By human calculation, Sahasra yuga, 1,000 cycles of the 4 ages, makes up the duration of Brahma's day, and of equal time is his night. And 1,000 of those yuga cycles makes one day. 1,000 ages taken together form the duration of Brahma's day, and so also is the duration of his night. Again and again, when Brahma's day arrives, all living entities come into being, and with the arrival of Brahma's night, they're helplessly annihilated. Yet there's another unmanifested nature. So this is attaining the Supreme. So he's giving a picture of the temporary realm, and of course indicating the transcendental realm and encouraging us, go there. This is the impetus, or there's the process and also the purpose of breaking the cycle of birth and death. The process is fix your mind on Krishna, madgatena antaratmana. And there's different methodologies that assist one in attaining that. The best is the methodology of pure devotional service, because the mixed devotional service, he explains, there's so many rules and it's so complicated. But for the devotee, they just engage in devotional service without attachment to the results of their activities, but simply for the service of Krishna. And it's not so complicated. It may not be easy to do because we're attached, but it's not complicated. The other system is there's so many rules and so many procedures and lifetimes, generally speaking. So he's advocating the pure devotional service route. That which the Vedantists describe as the unmanifest and infallible, avyakto shara iti yuktas, that which is known as the supreme destination, tam ahu paramam gatim, that place from which, having attained it, one never returns, yam prapya na nivartante, tad dhamam, that abode, paramam mama, that's my abode. So Krishna is inviting Arjuna, which means he's inviting us, to that supreme abode. And there's some things that are, facilities for getting there. This madgatena antaratmana in different ways, according to different yoga systems, according to different inclinations, according to one's nature, according to one's conditioning. But the fundamental background principle is bhakti. Then he says, Purusha saparaparta bhaktya labhyas tvananyaya. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, that's him, who is greater than all, is attainable by ananya bhakti. Although he is present in his abode, he is all-pervading, and everything is situated in him. So this is part of the contradictory, mystical double talk, kind of like the Upanishadic double talk. He's way over there, yet he's inside everything and pervades everything. He's in far beyond this place, yet he's within everything. It's just double talk. But it's not double talk. It's just different manifestations of that Supreme. So how is all of that, how is the double talk to be understood, or seeming double talk? By devotion. And when there's devotion, we discussed in the morning class, then it's not double talk anymore. It's just the various ways in which Krishna manifests himself, because he's unlimited, unlimitedly powerful. And through the medium of devotion, one can understand his unlimitedness. Not that we become unlimited, but we understand his unlimitedness, and then it becomes revealed to us, at least to our little capacity. And that way our little mind and our little self can be absorbed in the Supreme Self. That's in the medium is bhakti. Ananya bhakti. We're almost finished with chapter 8. O best of the Bhartas, I shall now explain to you. This word vakshami is here again. It was the second verse of the chapter. Vakshami again, towards the end of the chapter. It's the importance of mentioning that is, it's through sound. Tatshanu, I will explain. Vakshami, hear from me. Knowledge is imparted through sound. Transcendental knowledge is imparted through transcendental sound. And Krishna speaking enables one to receive transcendental knowledge. And those that are repeating the words of Krishna's transmitting that transcendental knowledge, it's sound vibration. I shall now explain to you the different times at which, passing away from this world, the yogi does or does not come back. So remember, there's the yoga mishra bhakti by which they can attain, but there's rules. And this time it works, and that time it doesn't work. But for those who are in the undivided devotion, there's no rule of when auspicious time or inauspicious time. It breaks the rules. It transcends or supersedes the rules. So the different times, text 24. Agnir Jyotir Aha Shukla. Those who know the Supreme Brahman attain that Supreme by passing away from the world during the influence of the fiery God in the light at an auspicious moment of the day during the fortnight of the waxing moon or during the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. Like Bhishma Dev, that's when Bhishma Dev parted. But he could break the rules too, but he followed the rules that yogis follow. The mystic who passes away from this world during the smoke, the night, the fortnight of the waning moon, or the 6 months when the sun passes to the south, reaches the moon planet, but again comes back. According to the Vedic opinion, there are two ways of passing from this world, one in the light and one in the darkness, and when one passes in light, he does not come back, but when he passes in darkness, he returns. There's references in the purport from Chandogya Upanishad that says the same thing. Although the devotees know these two paths, O Arjuna, they are never bewildered, therefore be always fixed in devotion. And we're at the last verse of the chapter. Summary. A person who accepts the path of devotional service is not bereft of the results derived from the whole list of auspicious. Auspicious things provide auspicious results. Those engaged in unalloyed devotional service receive the sum total of all those auspicious results from all those auspicious activities. Simply by performing devotional service, he attains all these, and at the end he reaches the supreme eternal abode. Yogi param sthanam upaiti chadyam. Attaining the supreme. So you can see a theme from this chapter, continuing from the previous chapter, Madgatena Antaratmana, the various ways by which one can achieve absorption in the supreme, the mind's absorption in the supreme. We had some discussion, was it yesterday or this morning, about the mind, the ruling of the mind? It was this morning? Yesterday? Evening? You want to explain that principle? Do you think you've understood it? You like me to say it again? You want to try it? I'll give you an exam, an oral exam. Give her the microphone. She's going to explain as best she can. The question was, why there's this hierarchy. The senses are above dull matter, the mind is above the senses, the intelligence above the mind, and above all is the soul. So why is there so much emphasis on the mind? Because it's in the hierarchy, it's down a little bit lower. So why all this emphasis on the mind? Something like that was your question.
Yes, Guru Maharaj. So I just remember a few salient points from that. The senses follow the mind. And when the mind is when senses follows the mind, and when the mind is controlled, the senses will automatically follow the mind.
The first part, it often works the other way. The senses dictate, the mind is subservient to the senses. That's when things are upside down. When things are right side up, when the mind is controlled, which is the question you're asking, why so much emphasis? It's possible when the intelligence is strong, it gives direction to the mind, then the mind gives direction to the senses. So that's the varying place is the mind, therefore it's very important.
Yes,
and keep going.
And then my question was, but the intelligence is higher, but then Maharaj's answer was the intelligence can be off if the intelligence is not strong or not acute.
And real intelligence is what is given by Super Soul to one who wants to come to him. Do you know the verse? Krishna gives intelligence to one who wants to come to him. Chaturshloki verse. You know the verse? I scared you. I'm sure you know the verse. Anyone here know the verse? Tesham satati yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami bodhi yogam tam yena mamupiyanti te. So there you know the verse. So bodhi or intelligence is given unto those who are constantly tesham satata Yuktanam. Engaged in what? Bhajatam priti, devotion with love unto Krishna. Then to such a person, Krishna gives intelligence. Intelligence gives direction to the mind. The mind gives direction to the senses. And the senses then, when controlled, are engaged in activities for devotion, because one wants devotion, so Krishna gives intelligence to do all of that. But when so the contemplation, even before you engage in devotional service, there's a function of the mind is accepting, rejecting. Supposing you reject, then you don't get intelligence. The mind isn't controlled and the senses rule. But supposing the mind says, at least the operative aspiration, the acceptance instead of rejection, is I want to be in my relationship with Krishna. That's a mind function. Then intelligence can be given by Krishna, will be given by Krishna, to align with that desire to be engaged in Krishna service. So desires are within the mind. Okay. So any Bhagavad Gita discussion? Chapter 8, Bhagavad Gita, or anything you like.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Can I ask a question, Guru Maharaj?
I hope so.
So, the sound vibration or hearing about Krishna is the best way to fix our mind. So, in case of Arjuna, Arjuna heard it from Krishna, so he was able to fix his mind, and then he acted on the interest of Krishna and fought the war. But I'm sure he was not thinking of Krishna while he was fighting. He was doing his prescribed duties.
Why do you say that?
He was engaged in the war and doing his
But Mama
prescribed...
Nusmara Yujita. Mama Nusmara and Yujita.
So he was doing his prescribed duties.
And thinking of Krishna.
My question is, how is that possible?
By attachment to Krishna.
So in our case, or my case,
Same.
when I go to office or when I go to work, in the morning we do sadhana here, chant, try to remember Krishna, fix our mind. But at work, we are involved in so many other activities. So it's, how do we keep our...
This is a standard working world person's question. Here's another way of saying the same thing. I get it. Morning sadhana up until 9 o'clock. Get it. Come home from work, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Evening sadhana, I get it. But what about 9 to 5? That's the question. There's another way of saying the same. Gradually, as one becomes attached to Krishna, one thinks of the activity in terms of service to Krishna. So let's take something that's maybe a little easier for most people, and that is you're cooking in the kitchen. You're not with your hand in your bead bag, but you're in the kitchen cooking. So okay, in the kitchen cooking, I'm listening to bhajans, or I'm hearing a lecture, or something, and I'm thinking this is for Krishna. I'm cooking for Krishna. I'm preparing items that are going to be offered to Krishna. So it's Krishna meditation while doing through sound and for whom this is being performed. Okay, that's a little easier. But why the same principle cannot be applied or is not applied in terms of what you do in your office place? Here's a nice example that Lord Chaitanya gave both to Rupa and Sanatan, and later he gave to Raghunath Das Goswami. They wanted to be with Lord Chaitanya. And he didn't say great. What he said was to Rupa and Sanatan, you know the history, he sent a little note saying, just as a woman who has a paramour, she does her duties in the household very nicely so that her husband won't detect that she's waiting, or all the while when she's doing her duties in her household, her mind is on her paramour. When will I get to meet with my paramour? And to Raghunath Das, he said, it wasn't in the letter, we just told him, don't be impetuous, go back, perform your duties as if you're a worldly person attached to your worldly activities, but all the while absorb yourself within. So there's an internal cultivation that's part of the life of devotion. And he didn't permit Rupa and Sanatan or Raghunath Das to just abandon their activity. He wanted them to do this internal cultivation. So that's, all of us have duties, and specifically for householders, there's a duty to purify propensities by taking up duties that match your psychophysical nature, and thus varna and ashram according to psychophysical nature, and to purify. And the purification includes both what you do inside, mamanusmara. So it's a challenge. But it's the purification challenge for those who are so inclined for, a life in the world. And the solution is not chuck the activity, because the activity is there because there's something inside. There's a propensity, the psychophysical nature. So now you, all of us have to purify ourselves by cultivation. Abhyasa yoga yuktena. So do a nice sadhana, morning and evening, and when you're at work, you try to contemplate, you cultivate the contemplation that this is for Krishna's service. Now, how is it for Krishna's service? Because it has nothing to do with Krishna's service, one might think. But why are you there in the first place? If you're a devotee, you have some responsibility to family, and those family members are spirit souls, and Krishna has entrusted some responsibility to you because you wanted, so he gave you the responsibility for certain spirit souls to see to their holistic well-being, which includes, what finance can provide. And so I'm providing that service as my part of my service to Krishna. Now, those are mental adjustments unless there's attachment to Krishna or a spiritual conception of who you are, who your family members are, and who Krishna is. But as you move towards the spiritual conception through gradual purification of psychophysical tendencies by performing prescribed duties and always thinking of Krishna, at least practicing, abhyasa, practicing, so it becomes matured through attachment to Krishna. So do a nice morning and evening sadhana in between. I'm dedicating this to you. Supposing you have a vacation, and how are you going to be Krishna conscious during your vacation if you're not Krishna conscious where you work? You'll be thinking of who's at the center. Now I get a break, right? Or I'm a sannyasi. I don't have a worldly occupation in an office, so I can be busy doing stuff where I'm at the center. So it's ashram specific, varna and ashram specific. There's purification for each one of us. The principle is the same principle. The application of that principle is different according to our varna and ashram, or the modes of nature and our psychophysical natures. But the principle doesn't change. So it's a challenge for you. And somebody else has their challenge, and somebody else has their challenge. Children have their challenge with schoolwork. And etc., distractions and social and emotional and all kinds of distractions. That's the challenge.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Internal cultivation, attachment to Krishna, good sadhana, and good association. As best, circumstance permits.
Thank you, Guru
Anything
Maharaj.
else? Anybody?
There's one more.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, you mentioned that for a devotee, it doesn't matter what time he passes from his body, his or her body. But Krishna mentions in the 8th chapter the different criteria
Yes.
for a yogi.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, what's the purpose of stating those requirements?
Because not everybody is a devotee. And for those that aren't devotee, it's not like, you're in the garbage can. There's instruction for those persons that aren't there yet. And there's instruction for those who are there. In other words, the knowledge of the Vedas is vast. The emphasis is clear, pure devotion. But supposing one's not there yet, what about me? So something is there for such people.
So the Maharaj, follow-up question would be, if one is not a devotee, but one satisfies those criteria, then can he go back to Godhead?
If one's not a devotee but satisfies those criteria,
Right.
no, because there's another feature, and that's the mind is attached. I mean, people are every minute of the day, people are dying, and your question is, those people that are not mind fixed on Krishna, and they happen to die during one of those times, what happens? Their karma rules. Their karma becomes dissolved by that remembrance of Krishna. But supposing somebody's just doing yoga, but they're not actively engaging their body in service to Krishna. So there's that kind of person, the Paramatma yogi. What about him? So that applies to them, not to just anybody. Is that all right?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I just have one little confusion on the three definitions that we learned in this chapter, Maharaj. Adi Deva, Adi Bhuta, and Adi Yagya. And Krishna is saying that in the form of universal form, I am Adi Deva, residence of all the demigods, and also as a super soul, I am Adi Yagya. So, and then later part of the section, Krishna says that if someone remembers me at the time of death, or at any point of time, then his life is successful. So remembering Krishna in Adi Deva form or Adi Yagya form, both are equal, or they?
No.
Okay.
No. And then the discussion of the universal form is so subtle, it's really hard to nail it. This is the discussion we've had in Naperville. I'm looking at Bhakti Dari because we had this discussion at the Naperville temple. The universal form is perplexing in many ways without going into what some of those ways are. It's perplexing. It is a form of Krishna, but is temporary and therefore not an eternal form of Krishna. And so that meditating on the eternal forms, any one of the eternal forms of Krishna, that's transcendental. Meditation on the universal form gives an indication of Krishna's presence, but it's not. You know the verse where Krishna says, what's the Sanskrit? Can't remember the Sanskrit right now. Pratak vidha. Krishna gives a very liberal definition of those who are my devotees. He includes in that liberal definition of those who are my devotees, those who meditate on me as the one supreme, the impersonal Brahman. What's that verse? Do you know the verse?
Janma karmo cha me divyam Maharaj.
What? But so there's a very liberal definition in which, in an unusual way, Krishna includes those who worship the universal form as his devotees. But there's the mixed position, not the position where by meditating on the universal form, which is material, that you attain transcendence. Is that right? So it's one of the transcendental forms of the Lord, starting with Paramatma and then the other avatar forms of the Lord. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Something online? Online?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Manasa is asking, after we involve devotional things and feel enough, and trying to involve more than overwhelming feelings, so how will we involve more in those scenarios?
Do you understand the question? I don't.
I was trying to read it over and over again to understand, but I'm not quite clear about it either.
I'll take a shot at it. I'm a devotee. I'm trying to evolve in my spiritual life, and by evolving in spiritual life, I'm engaging myself in more and more things. And how can I do that without getting overwhelmed? Sounds like what she's asking. That sounds like.
I think so.
Okay. Don't over-endeavor. So the essence of spiritual progress is not quantitative, but it's the love and devotion with which you offer. As love and devotion grows, capacity grows. So make your effort of loving service commensurate with your capacity. And be happy that Krishna will be happy because you're offering with love. And always being desiring, or desirous, always be desirous of offering more and offering with more devotion, both qualitative and quantitative. And then you're not in anxiety, stressed out. You're doing your capacity within reason, offering nice service. So it's one of the, in Rupa Goswami's writings, one of the destroyers of bhakti is over-endeavoring. So don't do that, because it can destroy bhakti. It can be very detrimental to bhakti. Anything else online? What?
Sridhar Prabhu send the text. Jnana yajnana chapi anyen atma.
What's the verse number? 9:15. Next chapter. Okay. Others who engage in sacrifice by the cultivation of knowledge, yana yagena chapyanye, then yajanto mam upasate, ekatvena. This is worship the Supreme Lord as one without a second, ekatvena. Then the next is prataktvena, diverse in many. And that diverse in many is the Vishvarup. You can see in the purport of 9:15. He who accepts the universal form, the Vishvarup of the Supreme Personality Godhead, and worships that, Krishna's counting amongst his devotees, but this is in the lower form. There are others who are still lower, and these are divided into three. You can check later, 9:15. Is that it?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, when Krishna says Sarva Papebhyo, does it include offenses too? Vamsi Krishna Prabhu is asking.
Cross your fingers. You have to do something special because of offenses, not just Krishna will become your janitor and clean up. You have to do something special. Offenses fall into a different category than karma. Now, having said that, one who surrenders to Krishna, Krishna can forgive. But Krishna will often direct one to the person who one is offended, if it's offending a Vaishnava in particular. Krishna is more lenient in offenses to himself than offenses to his devotees. For example, supposing amongst the 10 offenses, one of the offenses is being inattentive. And who can say that they're not chanting inattentively, or they're chanting with full attention? That's a pure devotee. So we're making offense when chanting. So supposing you surrender to Krishna, that means you stop your inattentive chanting. And when that inattentive chanting stop takes place, then the offense for inattentive chanting becomes dissolved, but it's not easy to overcome it. Inattentive chanting breeds inattentive chanting.
Guru Maharaj, I was just thinking about how to bring the patience and tolerance with the mind. Like when you
By
have
Krishna-
multiple things.
By Krishna consciousness. The stress of what you just described is the byproduct of turning attention away from Krishna. Supposing there's a very advanced devotee who we haven't met yet, but there's this really advanced devotee, and they're doing so many services, but their mind is always absorbed in Krishna. So they're not feeling stressed out by the so many things, the complications, because those things are part of their service to Krishna, and they're empowered to do those so many things in service to Krishna. Say the same thing in a different way. One of the causes of distress is to think that you're the doer. I've got to get this done. I'm the doer. And instead of thinking, I'm the instrument and Krishna can engage me as Krishna wants. It doesn't mean that for such a person, they're not feeling any discomfort, but they're not obsessing over it. They're confident that Krishna will help them, so they keep moving forward with Krishna consciousness. Think of Prabhupada. What did he do every day? How many different things did he do every day? How many stressors did he have? Whew. Makes you feel very humble and stressed out. So it's the distinction is remembrance and forgetfulness of Krishna.
So by that we can get the mind strength, right, Maharaj?
Well, yeah. This is her question, or the sequence. The mind strength comes from there's discipline. Yes, you engage in austerities purposefully. That brings its beginning stage. It's making wet wood into dry wood, and then comes igniting the dry wood. And when the igniting of the dry wood is there, the safety, the security, the shelter is in my relationship with Krishna, who then gives the intelligence that directs my mind, that directs my senses. It engages in the field of activities around me. When that connection with Krishna becomes weak, then we're like a piece of wood floating in the ocean where the waves go up and down.
Thank you.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.